Welcome to Functional Philosophy, the show in which I, Charles Tew, explain and apply Ayn Rand's philosophy, Objectivism. If you'd like to ask me a question on Objectivism or its application, just go to charlestew.com/contact. And my last name is spelled T as in tango, E as in echo, and W as in whiskey. What are the origins of human interests? Why do some people desire to be doctors or physicists or philosophers? Is this motivation based on premises, or are people, brains, genetically shaped to be attracted to certain subjects over others? Well, I can tell you only two things about this subject. Personal engagement is required in order to develop an interest in anything. So the development of interests is not deterministic, and you can't rule out on philosophical grounds the influence of genes. Now, normally what you would do in a situation like this is introspect to see where your own interests came from. Unfortunately, I can't do that for two reasons. First, my passion is for philosophy. And philosophy is something you could develop an interest in any context. It's not like getting interested in computers because you were around computers as a kid. Philosophy is about existence, and everything exists, so you could develop that in any context. So I can't identify anything about my surroundings that would have led me in that direction. Also, I can't remember a time when I wasn't interested in philosophy. I remember being fascinated by the question of premises, both those involved in logical arguments and those involved in propositions of any kind, when I was around 5 years old. I also remember around the same time wondering about the nature of sense perception and whether what different people saw was the same or not. So I can't actually remember any time when I didn't have the interests I have, so I don't know how I developed them. But I think most people have in mind something like the following. This will be a crude example, but it will illustrate the pattern. You're a little kid and your uncle is a firefighter, and he comes over and he puts on firefighter movies on TV in the background, and you see his fire truck and you get interested in that and develop a passion for firefighting. Now, is that the kind of thing that could happen in pattern? Yeah, I think your environment can play a role. Your specific environment. Obviously, you need some environment, but the specifics of your environment can influence you, but that does not rule out the influence of genes, nor, of course, of your personal effort. You would have to pay attention to your uncle and what he does, and you would have to be personally engaged with what's going on around you in order for you to even develop that interest in firefighting. It's like free will choices of any kind. Free will does not mean choosing what choices you have. It means being engaged with what's around you and making the best choice as a result. So having an influence on the development of your interests doesn't mean you get to choose directly, oh, I chose to be a firefighter when I was young. No, maybe you just chose to pay attention to what was going on around you, and that caused you to become interested in firefighting. Now, that's neither an interest coming ex nihilo out of your own head, nor is it environmental determinism. You could say it comes from your environment, but you have to be engaged with your environment in order to develop the interest. And it could be that having certain genes makes you predisposed to find certain aspects of existence titillating. That is a scientific question. Even the influence of environment is a scientific question. I wouldn't take that for granted either. As I say, it's unclear how anybody would come to develop an interest in philosophy if the pattern were as simple as, oh, I played with Legos as a kid, and so then I decided I wanted to be an architect. So again, all I have to say here is that an individual's engagement with his surroundings is a prerequisite for developing any kind of interest in anything, but that doesn't mean environment and genes don't play a role. Now, you mentioned premises. Yes, premises play a role. That is what results from engagement with the world. You look at the world, you notice things about it, you notice connections. X causes Y, X relates to me in some way, and that is a premise, and that causes you to feel certain things. Now, that is not in opposition to your genes. You have an emotional mechanism, but you have to fill it up with content, premises. But the emotional mechanism can differ. It differs between men and women, obviously. Men get angrier, presumably with the same premises. So it's not as if for premises to be a part of this equation, then there must be no place for genes. Your genes could simply determine how excited any particular thing makes you. And then you form the premises, you notice the connections yourself, and then your genes determine which of those premises really gets you going. What aspect of reality really excites you. I mean, you have to have a physiology before premises will do anything. But you also need premises in order to activate your emotional mechanism, which is a result of your physiology. So there's no opposition here. These things work together. Next question. Is an eye for an eye a fundamentally good idea, or does it just cause more harm than good? Well, metaphorically, yes, it is a good idea. Literally, no, it is not a good idea. If an eye for an eye means let the punishment fit the crime, let there be proportionality in punishment, then yes, I agree with it. A murderer should be punished by the legal system to a greater degree than a thief should be. But if you mean, should the state sanction the gouging out of people's eyes when it is meting out punishment? No, because giving the state the power to inflict cruel and unusual punishment is a dangerous thing, and it's not necessary for protecting people's rights. We don't want the state to be able to threaten people with torture. Citizens, I mean, terrorists I'm fine with. Now, I don't believe in any moral practical dichotomy in punishment. Just as I don't believe in that dichotomy anywhere else. An eye for an eye is both a moral and practical policy. It's not something you do to balance the cosmic scales, but it's also not something you do as a pragmatic deterrent. Take, for instance, putting a murderer in jail. Well, do you do that because he deserves it as a moral principle, or because it deters murderers and gets this murderer away from other people he might murder? Well, those are the same thing. The moral is the practical. Putting him in prison for a long time is bad for him and good for other people, and both of those at the same time for the same reason. It's a punishment for him and a practical defense for everyone else because he did something morally wrong. And doing something morally wrong is also practically wrong. It's not like we want to hurt criminals as an end in itself, nor is it, well, we want to defend ourselves without any reference to morality. No, morality and practicality are inextricable. They are the same thing, just looked at from two different perspectives. So an eye for an eye is valid because it is practical and moral. Putting a murderer in prison for a long time is what the murderer deserves. Again, not in any cosmic or supernatural sense, but because deserve means this is how other people should treat you. and other people should treat murderers as dangerous outlaws who need to be locked away. So you have to get out of this idea that morality is this intrinsic thing out there with no relationship to people or their values. That is all morality is about. So saying somebody deserves to go to jail is not the same thing as saying there's some intrinsic commandment, requirement that this person go to jail. It just means we as individuals should put this guy in jail from our perspective because he's a threat to us. That's what it means to say he deserves to go to jail. Next question. As an objectivist, would you say that you are a materialist/secular humanist? No/no. Now, materialist can mean a few things. In the crudest sense, it can mean that you deny the existence of consciousness. No, objectivists do not deny the existence of consciousness. It can also mean that you treat consciousness as reducible to matter. It exists, but it's epiphenomenal. It has no life of its own, so to speak. This too we reject. Consciousness does depend on existence. It needs something to be aware of, which is existence, and it also depends on sense organs and whole neurophysiology. But once it exists, it does have independent causal efficacy, even in non-volitional animals. Will is a cog in the causal machinery. So we are not monists. Maybe calling us dualists is also misleading, but we believe in both the mental and the physical, in both consciousness and existence, and we don't try to reduce one to the other. It's not that consciousness is a mere light show playing on top of a material world, nor is it that the physical world is merely a projection of consciousness. Now, you can even take consciousness out of the picture completely, and let's talk just about existence, just about the physical world. Well, even there, we are not materialists. Philosophically, you can distinguish the mental from the physical, but you can't establish philosophically that physical equates to material. These are not the same thing. Now, to the extent this can be described in words, rather than just pointing, which is what you ultimately have to do when you get to the bottom of anything, I say physical is defined as that which can't overlap. I'm tempted to say physically overlap here, which just underscores the fact that I have to ultimately point to what I'm talking about. But what I mean is, two physical things can't exist in the same place. That's what a ghost is. What makes a ghost a ghost? Why is this a ghost and not just a person? Because he can go through walls. That's what makes him non-physical. He can overlap with the physical world. In fact, that's what makes consciousness non-physical. That's what makes the mental non-physical. It exists without existing in space. So it doesn't overlap physically with anything. It doesn't have a physical location. It doesn't exist in any kind of dimension of extension. So anyway, if you think about it, that's what we mean by physical when we talk about it. Everybody understands this. Physical means things bump up against each other. A ghost can go through a wall because it's a supernatural thing. It's not physical. Now, that is not the same thing as saying material. Material means that the thing itself has extension, that it's something like a little particle. But it could just be a little flow of energy, was Ayn Rand's example. She said, the universe could be at bottom made up of solid flows of energy. Peikoff often used the example of puffs of metaphysical energy. Now, energy is not material. You could think of it as raw force, perhaps. Now, it's physical. You couldn't have two energy entities overlap because they're both physical. But that doesn't mean that they both exist in the way a little particle would. It's not like they're a little material thing. Now, it could be that way. I'm not saying that the universe isn't fully material. It could be. You just can't establish that philosophically. All you can say philosophically is that there is the physical and the mental. And the physical could ultimately reduce to matter or energy or whatever. Now you ask about secular humanism. Well, the thing about secular humanism is that it's not so secular. It grows out of people like Auguste Comte, who created a religion of humanity, which should not be shocking to you if you understand Objectivism, because secular humanism is what? It's just code for atheistic, altruistic, leftist collectivism. Now, collectivism is a form of supernaturalism. It means treating the group as a platonic entity above and beyond the individuals who make it up. So it shouldn't surprise you at all that somebody like Comte would create a religion out of collectivism. So no, objectivists are not secular humanists because we are secular and we care about human beings, while secular humanists are neither secular nor do they care very much about individual human beings. If you'd like to keep up with everything I do, just go to charlestew.com. If you'd like to enable me to do more, just go to patreon.com/charlestew and become a supporter. Thanks for listening.